Title: The Black Knight and the Sacred Sword. In a land shrouded in eternal twilight, where the sun's light barely touched the earth, there existed a knight cloaked in darkness. His armor, black as the midnight sky, gleamed faintly in the dim light. His name was Kale, the Black Knight, a warrior whose heart had been sealed by the very shadows that now clung to his every step. Kale had not always been bound to the darkness. Long ago, he had been a noble knight in a kingdom of light, sworn to protect the people from the encroaching evil. But a fateful battle had changed everything. The sword he wielded, the sacred sword of Uranus, had been shattered in a battle with an ancient and powerful sorcerer. The dark magic from the sorcerer's curse had seeped into Kale's soul, transforming him into the very thing he had once fought against. Now, Kale wandered alone, seeking redemption, but also bearing the burden of a prophecy. The only way to lift the curse was to restore the sacred sword, and to do that, he must find the lost temple of Uranus, hidden deep within the forgotten forest. Kale journeyed through the forest, where ancient trees twisted towards the heavens and the ground was soft with fallen leaves. The forest was silent, save for the faint rustle of the wind, as if the world itself held its breath. Every step he took seemed to echo in the stillness, and the shadows felt closer than ever before. He could feel the weight of his curse growing heavier with each passing day. The darkness threatened to consume him entirely, to erase the last remnants of the man he once was. But still, he pressed on. The vision of the sacred sword's hilt, gleaming with an ethereal light, kept him moving forward. It was his only hope. As Kale neared the heart of the forest, a sudden rustle broke the silence. From the shadows emerged a figure, a woman, dressed in flowing robes of silver and white, her long hair shimmering like the moonlight. Her eyes, deep and knowing, met Kale's with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the darkness that surrounded him. "You seek the sacred sword, do you not?" the woman asked, her voice a soft melody that seemed to calm the storm within him. Kale nodded, unsure of who she was or how she knew of his quest. "I do, but the path is treacherous, and I fear I may not be strong enough to find it." The woman smiled gently. "You are stronger than you know, Kale. The sword is not just an object of power, it is a symbol of your heart. It will only be restored when you have faced the darkness within yourself." The woman, whose name was Celine, guided Kale deeper into the forest. She spoke of ancient rites, of trials that tested the spirit, and of the true nature of the sacred sword. It was not forged to fight evil, but to protect the light that resided in every heart. Kale had forgotten that truth in his years of wandering. He had sought the sword only as a means to undo the curse that bound him, but Celine reminded him that redemption could only be found within. As they ventured onward, Kale faced 3 trials, each one designed to force him to confront his own fears. The first trial was a vision of his past, a memory of the battle that had shattered the sword. In the vision, Kale stood on a battlefield, his comrades falling around him. The sorcerer's power was overwhelming, and in that moment, Kale felt the crushing weight of his failure. He had been unable to protect his friends, unable to save the kingdom. But Celine's voice broke through the memory. "You did not fail, Kale. You fought with honor, with courage. The darkness that claimed you was not your fault." Kale's heart began to stir. The guilt that had weighed him down for so long began to lift, replaced by a flicker of hope. The second trial took the form of shadows, dark, swirling tendrils that sought to drag Kale into their depths. But as he fought back, the darkness within him began to dissolve, as if his own inner strength was counteracting the curse. Finally, in the third trial, Kale stood before a vast chasm. On the other side lay the sacred sword, resting on an altar of stone, bathed in an ethereal light. But between him and the sword was a vast abyss, and Kale knew that crossing it meant facing the final test of his heart trust. He looked to Celine, who nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "You must trust yourself, Kale. The sword will not come to you until you believe in your own light." With a deep breath, Kale stepped forward, his heart steady, his resolve firm. As he crossed the chasm, he felt the darkness that had clung to him for so long begin to release its grip. And at the moment he reached the altar, the sacred sword rose into his hand, its light shining brighter than ever before. With the sacred sword once again whole, Kale's transformation was complete. The darkness that had consumed him was gone, and in its place was a renewed sense of purpose. The prophecy had been fulfilled. He had faced his own demons and emerged victorious. Celine smiled, her mission complete. "You have done it, Kale. The light within you has conquered the darkness. Now, go. The world needs you." Kale nodded, his heart light with the knowledge that he was no longer the man he had once been. He was no longer the Black Knight, he was a protector, a guardian of the light, and he would carry the sacred sword to defend the realm from the forces of darkness. As he left the forest behind, Kale's path was clear. The battle was not over, but with the sacred sword in hand and his heart filled with the light of redemption, he was ready to face whatever came next. Kale's journey was far from over. The restoration of the sacred sword had not been a simple victory. While the darkness that had plagued his soul was vanquished, a new shadow loomed on the horizon, one that threatened the entire realm. The winds whispered of an ancient evil, a dark sorceress named Morrigan, who had long desired the sacred sword for herself. It was said that she wielded the power to control the very forces of nature, storms, fire, and shadow, bending them to her will. It was Morrigan who had once cursed the sword and fractured its power, and now, she sought to reclaim it in full. Kale knew that to protect the world he had sworn to defend, he would need to confront Morrigan and put an end to her reign of terror. With Celine's guidance, he set out toward the desolate plains where Morrigan's fortress lay hidden on an ancient castle. Half buried in the sands of time, shrouded by the wrathful winds that Morrigan had summoned. The path to Morrigan's fortress was treacherous. Kale traveled through barren lands where the earth cracked beneath his boots, and the winds howled like a chorus of wailing spirits. As he approached the fortress, the sky darkened further, casting the land in a perpetual twilight. The castle's spires rose like jagged teeth against the stormy sky, and the air hummed with an unnatural energy. Inside the castle, the atmosphere was suffocating. Shadows clung to the stone walls, flickering with a menacing glow. As Kale ventured deeper, his footsteps echoed through the empty halls, the silence oppressive. Morrigan's presence was palpable, like a constant weight pressing on his chest. At the heart of the fortress, Kale found the throne room vast and imposing, with a throne carved from black stone. Sitting upon it was Morrigan, her eyes glowing with an eerie light, her long, dark hair flowing like a river of night. She rose to her feet as Kale entered, her laughter like the sound of wind through dead branches. "So, the Black Knight returns, armed with the sword that once was mine," she said, her voice cold and venomous. "You think you can stop me, Kale? The sacred sword will not save you from what is to come." Kale gripped the hilt of the sacred sword, feeling its power surge through him. The blade was no longer just a weapon, it was a part of him, an extension of his own will. "I will stop you, Morrigan. Your reign of darkness ends here." The battle between Kale and Morrigan was one for the ages. The fortress trembled as they clashed, light and darkness colliding with a force that could shake the heavens. Morrigan summoned winds that howled with rage, flinging shards of stone and debris at Kale. But the sacred sword gleamed brighter with each strike, its light cutting through the storm like a beacon of hope. Morrigan's laughter echoed as she conjured blasts of shadow that sought to engulf Kale. But he stood firm, the sacred sword blazing with an intensity that burned away the dark magic. "You cannot defeat me with light alone," Morrigan sneered, her form shifting and warping as if she were one with the darkness. But Kale knew that Morrigan's strength was not invincible. Her power came from fear, from the shadows she cast in the hearts of those who faced her. And Kale had faced his own fears already. He had conquered the darkness within himself. He was no longer the Black Knight, he was the bearer of the sacred sword, a protector of the light. With a roar, Kale charged forward, his sword raised high. The blade cut through the shadow, and with a single, powerful strike, it pierced Morrigan's heart. The sorceress cried out in agony as her form shattered into 1,000 fragments of dark energy, which dissolved into the air like mist in the morning sun. The storm that had raged over the land ceased, and the castle began to crumble, the curse Morrigan had placed upon it lifting. The winds calmed, the darkness retreated, and the land began to heal. With Morrigan's fall, peace was restored to the realm. Kale stood atop the ruins of the fortress, the sacred sword gleaming brightly in his hand. The sky above cleared, and for the first time in years, the sun's warm rays bathed the earth. Celine appeared beside him, her serene smile a reflection of the peace that had returned. "You did it, Kale. The world is safe once more." Kale looked at the sword in his hand, feeling the weight of its power and the light that it now represented. "No, Celine. It was not just the sword. It was the strength within me, the belief in the light that I had almost forgotten. I have learned that redemption is not found in the weapon we wield, but in the choices we make." Celine nodded. "You have truly become the protector of light, Kale. The Black Knight is no more. You are now the Knight of the Sacred Sword, the guardian of peace." Kale turned his gaze to the horizon, where the first rays of dawn illuminated the world. "And I will continue to protect this world, as long as I breathe." With that, Kale set forth on a new journey, not as a knight bound by darkness, but as a beacon of hope, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. After the fall of Morrigan and the restoration of peace to the realm, Kale continued to travel. His heart was light, yet there was still a question that lingered, a question about his past and the purpose of the sacred sword. Despite the peace he had helped restore, the world around him still felt incomplete, as if there were hidden truths waiting to be uncovered. One evening, as Kale rested by a quiet river under the stars, he felt a strange pull deep within him. A voice, soft but familiar, called to him from the shadows. "Kale." He rose, his hand instinctively reaching for the sacred sword, his senses alert. From the darkness, a figure emerged, a figure draped in a cloak of midnight blue, with eyes that glowed faintly like distant stars. "Who are you?" Kale asked, his voice firm yet laced with curiosity. The figure stepped forward, revealing a woman, her features both ethereal and regal. "I am Elysia, the keeper of the lost histories. I have watched your journey, Kale, and now, I have come to reveal to you the truth of the sacred sword." Kale's heart skipped a beat. "The truth? I thought I knew the sword's history. The sword was forged to protect the light, to combat darkness." Elysia nodded. "That is true, but there is more to the story, a story long hidden. The sacred sword was not just forged by the ancient kingdoms, it was created by the gods themselves, a symbol of balance between light and shadow. But it was never meant to be wielded by one alone. It was meant to be shared, a bond between two souls, one born of light and one born of darkness. You, Kale, are the first to wield it alone, and that is why the curse was cast upon you." Kale was silent, trying to absorb her words. "A bond between two souls. But I've borne this sword alone. It has been my burden." Elysia's gaze softened. You have carried the weight of both light and darkness within you. But now, the time has come to find the other soul, the one destined to wield the sacred sword beside you. Only when the balance is restored will the sword's true power be realized, and only then can the realm be truly at peace. The revelation struck Cale deeply. All these years, he had thought of the sword as his alone, his weapon of redemption. But now, he understood that his journey was not yet complete. There was another destined to share in the sword's power, a companion, a protector whose light would complement his own. With this newfound purpose, Cale set forth on a new quest to find the light-bearer, the one who was meant to stand beside him. His journey took him across vast kingdoms, through rugged mountains and over sprawling plains. He traveled to the farthest reaches of the world, searching for clues, hearing whispers of a prophecy of a child born under a rare celestial event, the eclipse of the twin moons, when the moonlight and starlight converged, creating a moment of perfect harmony. In a secluded village nestled between two great mountains, Cale found his answer. There, in the heart of the village, lived a young woman named Lyra. Her eyes shimmered with the glow of the moon, and her presence seemed to calm the restless winds that swept through the land. Cale felt an undeniable connection the moment he saw her, a deep, instinctual pull. Lyra had always felt different from others, an inexplicable sense of purpose, of belonging to something greater. When Cale approached her and spoke of the sacred sword, Lyra was not surprised. She had known, deep within her heart, that her destiny was tied to the blade. "I've waited for you," Lyra said softly. "I've known that this day would come." Cale and Lyra's bond was immediate, a union of light and darkness. Together, they set forth to uncover the true power of the sacred sword. As they traveled, their connection deepened, each one complementing the other. Cale had once been consumed by the darkness, and Lyra, with her pure heart and radiant spirit, was the light that Cale had longed for. She was his counterpart, the one who would balance his soul and bring out the sword's true potential. Their journey was not without its challenges. As they ventured deeper into the world, they encountered remnants of Morrigan's followers, cultists who sought to resurrect the dark sorceress. These followers believed that with Morrigan's return, they could plunge the world back into eternal night. But with the power of their combined light and darkness, Cale and Lyra stood strong, defeating every foe that crossed their path. Through these battles, Cale learned to embrace the full spectrum of his being. He no longer feared the darkness within him, for he now understood that it was a part of him, just as the light was. And Lyra's unwavering belief in the light reminded him of the power of hope, of redemption, and of the strength to overcome any obstacle. Their final challenge came when they reached the Temple of the Gods, a hidden sanctuary where the true power of the sacred sword was said to reside. The gods themselves awaited Cale and Lyra, ready to test their bond and their readiness to wield the sword in its full glory. As they entered the temple, the skies above darkened, and the air crackled with divine energy. The gods, majestic and awe-inspiring, appeared before them, their forms shifting between light and shadow. "You have come," said the voice of the chief god, Aranther, the god of balance. "You, Cale, have borne the darkness alone for far too long. And you, Lyra, are the light that will bring peace to this world. Together, you are the chosen protectors." The gods extended their hands, and the sacred sword began to glow brighter than ever before. The blade pulsed with the power of the divine, resonating with the bond between Cale and Lyra. "Now, you must choose," Aranther continued. "Will you accept the full responsibility of this power and become the guardians of the realm, protecting it from the forces that seek to destroy it?" Without hesitation, Cale and Lyra nodded, their hearts aligned. Together, they raised the sacred sword high. the light radiating from it like a beacon across the heavens. The gods smiled, knowing that the realm had found its true guardians. And so, Kale and Lyra became the eternal guardians, protectors of the light and the darkness, keeping the balance that the world so desperately needed. Together, they traveled the lands, bringing peace wherever they went, guarding the sacred sword, and ensuring that the forces of darkness would never again threaten the realm. The prophecy had been fulfilled. The Black Knight and the Lightbearer had united, and their bond had restored the sacred sword to its true power. Together, they would remain, forever intertwined, as the eternal protectors of the realm. As Kale looked to the horizon, now bathed in the light of a new dawn, he knew that their journey was not over. The world was ever changing, and new challenges would arise. But as long as he and Lyra stood together, they would face whatever darkness came, for they were the guardians of balance, and their light would never fade. Years passed since Kale and Lyra became the eternal guardians, and the world flourished under their protection. With the sacred sword now fully empowered, they ventured far and wide, defending the lands from the forces of darkness and ensuring that peace reigned throughout the realm. But in the quietest corners of the world, shadows stirred once more. One fateful night, as Kale and Lyra stood on a cliff overlooking a tranquil valley, the winds began to change. The air grew colder, and the once clear skies darkened as a storm seemed to gather on the horizon. "Something is wrong," Lyra whispered, her brow furrowing as she gazed at the gathering clouds. Kale tightened his grip on the sacred sword. "I feel it too. The balance is shifting." From the depths of the storm, a dark figure appeared, emerging from the shadows like a specter. It was Morgantha, no longer the woman Kale had once defeated. The darkness that had consumed her was now a living force, an embodiment of corruption that sought to reclaim the world. "I am reborn," Morrigan's voice echoed across the winds. "I have risen from the abyss, stronger than before. The balance has been fractured, and I shall return to claim what is rightfully mine." Kale and Lyra stepped forward, united as always. "You will not succeed," Kale declared, his voice resolute. "The balance will never be broken while we stand together." Morrigan's laugh was low and menacing. "Your light is weak. You, Kale, may have found your counterpart, but your bond is still fragile. Your union is an illusion of harmony." A blast of dark energy shot toward them, but Kale and Lyra raised the sacred sword in unison, its light cutting through the darkness like a beacon. The battle between light and shadow had begun anew. For days, Kale and Lyra fought against the relentless tide of darkness, as Morrigan summoned hordes of shadow creatures to do her bidding. Despite their strength and unity, the darkness seemed endless, testing their resolve and their bond. In the midst of the chaos, Lyra began to feel the strain. The sacred sword's power, though immense, was not enough to defeat Morrigan's corruption. She could feel the darkness creeping into her own heart, threatening to divide her from Kale. "Kale," Lyra whispered one night, as they camped beneath the stars. "I feel it. The darkness. It's inside me." Kale knelt beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "It is not you, Lyra. It's the darkness trying to twist your heart. We have faced worse trials, and we can face this together." Lyra closed her eyes, drawing strength from his words. "But what if? What if I am not enough? What if I can't hold the light anymore?" Kale took her hand, his gaze unwavering. "You are more than enough. You are the light that guides me. We are each other's strength. We cannot allow the darkness to divide us. We must trust in our bond." With renewed resolve, Lyra stood. Together, they raised the sacred sword, and the light shone brighter than ever before. But Morrigan, sensing their unity, launched a final, devastating attack. A wave of dark energy so powerful it threatened to engulf the land itself. "Fight, Lyra," Kale shouted, holding her close as the storm of darkness raged around them. "We are the balance, the sword of light and darkness. Together, we can defeat her." Lyra nodded, her spirit rekindled by his words. She summoned every ounce of her strength, channeling the light of the sacred sword into a blinding wave of energy. The darkness recoiled, but Morrigan was not yet finished. "You think you can defeat me so easily?" Morrigan hissed, her form shifting and growing stronger, feeding on the very shadows around her. Kale and Lyra faced her once more, their combined power now a beacon of hope in the storm. "This ends now," Kale said. With one final, synchronized strike, Kale and Lyra plunged the sacred sword into the heart of Morrigan's darkness. A brilliant explosion of light erupted, shattering the shadows that had plagued the world for so long. When the light faded, the storm had passed. The land, once shrouded in darkness, was now bathed in the gentle glow of the morning sun. Morrigan's form was gone, her darkness vanquished once and for all. Kale and Lyra stood together, the sacred sword now glowing with a steady, peaceful light. Their bond had been tested, but it had endured. The darkness had been defeated, and the world was at peace once more. But as they stood there, gazing at the horizon, they both knew that their journey was far from over. Though the immediate threat had been vanquished, the realm was ever changing. New challenges would arise, and they would face them together, side by side. "We have won, Kale," Lyra said softly, her voice full of quiet pride. "We have," Kale agreed, his heart full of love and gratitude for the woman who had stood beside him through it all. "But our story is just beginning." And so, Kale and Lyra, the eternal guardians, continued their journey. They walked the lands, not as mere protectors, but as symbols of hope, light, and the power of unity. The sacred sword, no longer a weapon of destruction, was now a symbol of peace, its true power realized through the bond between them. The realm was safe once more, but Kale and Lyra knew that as long as they stood together, the light would never fade, and the darkness would never prevail. As the days passed, Kale and Lyra returned to the citadel where they had first sworn their oaths to protect the realm. The land was peaceful once more, but they knew that peace was fragile, and their duty was not yet complete. Standing before the ancient stone altar, they placed their hands upon the hilt of the sacred sword, now a symbol of their bond and their purpose. "I swear," Kale began, his voice firm but full of compassion, "to protect this world, to uphold the balance, and to stand with you, Lyra. As we face the trials yet to come." Lyra's eyes shone with determination. "I swear to remain by your side, Kale, to guard the light and protect the darkness that gives balance to this world. Together, we will face whatever the future holds." The winds around the citadel began to stir, as though nature itself was acknowledging their oath. The sacred sword pulsed with a soft glow, resonating with the power of their words. The bond they shared was unbreakable, and the world could feel the harmony they brought. Despite their victory over Morrigan, whispers from distant lands began to reach Kale and Lyra. Rumors of a new threat had surfaced, a forgotten force from an ancient time. Tales spoke of an ancient isle, hidden away beyond the known seas, where dark magic was said to have been sealed away centuries ago. One evening, as they sat under the stars by a quiet fire, Kale spoke the words that had been on his mind. "Lyra, I feel the winds of change. There's something out there, something we have not yet faced. The winds are shifting, and I believe the Forgotten Isles are calling us." Lyra gazed into the flames, her mind turning over the mysteries they had uncovered during their journeys. "I sense it too. A new challenge is coming, one that will test us in ways we can't yet imagine." With a shared look of resolve, they knew their path was clear. The Forgotten Isles awaited them, and the danger it posed could not be ignored. The journey to the Forgotten Isles was not one for the faint of heart. They sailed across vast oceans, their ship cutting through waters that seemed to whisper of ancient secrets. The seas were turbulent, and the air was thick with an eerie tension that weighed on their spirits. As they sailed onward, strange occurrences began to happen. The stars in the night sky seemed to move in unnatural patterns. And the sea itself seemed alive, as though some ancient force was watching them from beneath the waves. Cale stood at the bow of the ship, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing upon him. "Lyra, do you feel it? We're being watched." Lyra nodded, her hand resting on the hilt of the sacred sword. "I do, but we cannot turn back now. The Isles are close. Whatever awaits us there, we will face it together." After days of sailing through uncharted waters, the shadow of the Forgotten Isles finally loomed on the horizon. Towering cliffs rose from the sea, jagged and foreboding, and the air grew thick with an ancient, oppressive magic. "Prepare yourself," Cale said, his voice low with determination. "We are about to face the unknown." The ship docked at a small, rocky inlet. The land before them was dark and desolate, with no signs of life. The Forgotten Isles were not like any other land they had encountered. It was as though time itself had forgotten this place. As Cale and Lyra ventured deeper into the Isles, they soon found themselves in a vast cavern, the walls of which were inscribed with ancient runes. In the center of the cavern stood a colossal stone altar, pulsing with dark energy. A figure cloaked in shadows emerged from the depths of being neither alive nor dead, bound to the magic of the Isles. "I am the keeper," the figure intoned, its voice echoing through the cavern. "The magic sealed here is ancient, and those who seek it must understand the cost of its power." Cale and Lyra stood firm, their resolve unshaken. "We seek no power for ourselves," Cale declared. "We seek only to protect the balance." The keeper studied them with piercing eyes. "The balance you protect is fragile. The world you know is built upon 1,000 secrets, and one of them lies within the heart of this isle. You are not prepared for what you will find." Lyra stepped forward, her voice calm and unwavering. "We will face whatever lies ahead. We are the eternal guardians, bound by our oath. We protect not only the light, but the shadows as well." The keeper's eyes flickered with what could have been a smile. "Very well. But know this: what you find here will test everything you believe in." The ground beneath them began to tremble, and the altar erupted in a burst of dark energy, revealing an ancient artifact, a crystal glowing with a deep, almost hypnotic light. Cale and Lyra approached cautiously, the sacred sword in Cale's hand now glowing with an otherworldly light. "What is this?" Cale asked, his voice filled with awe. The keeper's voice was a whisper in the wind. "This is the heart of the Isles. It is a source of immense power, one that can either save or destroy this world. The choice is yours." As Cale and Lyra stood before the heart of the Isles, they knew that their journey was far from over. The choice they made here would shape the future of the world. The darkness had not been vanquished completely, and new threats would rise in the shadows. But Cale and Lyra were ready. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, united by their love, their oath, and their unwavering determination to protect the balance of light and darkness. The heart of the Isles pulsed with an ancient and eerie energy, its glowing crystal casting shadows across the cavern. Cale and Lyra stood before it, their hearts heavy with the weight of the keeper's words. The power contained within the heart could either save the world or bring about its destruction. "Cale, Lyra," the keeper's voice echoed, soft and cryptic. "Only one may touch the heart. The one who does will carry its power and its burden. If you choose to wield it, you will reshape the world, but be warned, the price is steep. The darkness will grow, and so too will the light. There can be no balance without sacrifice." Cale looked at Lyra, his gaze steady, but a storm of thoughts churned within him. They had faced countless trials together, but this was unlike anything they had encountered before. The very essence of the world lay in their hands. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes filled with the quiet strength that had always defined her. "We have sworn to protect the balance," she said softly, her hand resting gently on the hilt of the sacred sword. "The heart's power. We must use it to ensure that the light and darkness are kept in harmony. If one side grows too strong, it will tip the world into chaos." "But what is the cost of such power?" The keeper did not answer immediately. Instead, it gestured toward the heart of the Isles, the air growing thick with the magic of ages. "To wield the heart," it said, "is to bind oneself to the fate of the world. You will not only control the magic, it will control you. What you do next will shape the future." Kale clenched his fists. "We are already bound to the fate of the world. Our duty is to protect it. If this is the way, then we will do it together." Lyra nodded, her face pale but resolute. Together, with a single, determined motion, Kale stepped forward and reached out to touch the heart of the Isles. The moment his fingers made contact, the world around them seemed to shift. Light and darkness twisted in a violent dance, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn asunder. Pain shot through Kale's body, and he gasped, feeling the immense power flood his veins. Lyra cried out in concern, but he gripped her hand, his other hand still holding the heart. "Kale," Lyra shouted, her voice full of worry. "Do not lose yourself to it." The keeper's voice echoed in their minds, a warning. "Once touched, the heart binds you. You must choose, will you wield the power for the greater good? Or will you succumb to its temptation? The heart is not merely a weapon, it is a reflection of the one who wields it." Kale's vision blurred as the power surged within him. Darkness threatened to overtake him, whispering promises of untold strength, of an end to all suffering and strife. But Kale could feel Lyra's presence beside him, her unwavering light anchoring him to the path of righteousness. "No," Kale murmured, shaking his head as the darkness writhed within him. "I will not let this consume me. I will protect the balance." With the force of will, Kale's inner light flared, pushing the darkness back. The power of the heart swirled around him but did not overwhelm him. He and Lyra were united in their purpose, and together, they held the power of the heart without succumbing to its dark temptations. The keeper's voice resonated once more, this time with a sense of approval. "You have chosen wisely. The heart will not bind you, for your bond is stronger than any force of darkness. The power of the Isles is now yours to wield, but remember, this true balance is not achieved through strength alone. It is achieved through sacrifice and wisdom." Kale exhaled deeply, the weight of the heart's power still heavy in his chest. "We will use it wisely," he vowed. "We will not let the darkness rise again." With the heart of the Isles now in their possession, Kale and Lyra made their way back to the citadel, where they would determine how best to use the power they had gained. As they sailed back across the vast ocean, the skies began to clear, and the once foreboding atmosphere of the Forgotten Isles gave way to a sense of calm. Kale stood at the bow of their ship, gazing out across the calm waters. "The heart is a gift, but also a burden. I can feel its power, its pull. But we must remain vigilant. The balance is fragile, and our duty is greater than ever." Lyra stood beside him, her eyes soft but resolute. "We will protect it. We will protect the balance. Together, we will ensure that this power is never misused." The days that followed were spent in contemplation and careful planning. Kale and Lyra knew that the power of the heart could reshape the world, but it was not a power to be wielded lightly. They would use it only when the need was greatest, and they would never forget the lessons they had learned in the Forgotten Isles. In the months that followed their return, Kale and Lyra worked together to strengthen the realm. They traveled to the farthest reaches of the land, ensuring that peace was maintained and that the forces of darkness remained at bay. The sacred sword remained a powerful symbol of their unity, but the heart of the Isles was kept in secret, a tool for when the world truly needed it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kale and Lyra stood on a high hill overlooking the peaceful realm they had sworn to protect. The world was quiet, and for the first time in many years, Kale felt a sense of peace settle in his heart. "We've done it, Lyra," Kale said softly, his voice full of gratitude. "We've kept the balance." Lyra smiled, her eyes sparkling. "Yes, Kale, we have, but our journey is not over. The balance must be guarded, always. The light and the dark will always be at odds, but as long as we stand together, we will ensure the world remains whole." And so, Kale and Lyra, the eternal guardians, continued their watch over the realm. With the heart of the Isles, the sacred sword, and their unbreakable bond, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would protect the world for as long as it needed them. Years passed, and the realm remained peaceful, with Kale and Lyra guarding the heart of the Isles from those who might seek its power. Yet, as time wore on, there were whispers on the wind, dark whispers that spoke of a new threat rising from the depths of forgotten realms. Kale felt the pull of these whispers in his dreams, the echoes of a shadow that sought to devour all light. One night, as Kale meditated beneath the stars, the faintest ripple of darkness brushed against his mind. A cold wind swept through the trees, and the once quiet air grew thick with an unfamiliar presence. Kale, Lyra's voice broke through his trance, a note of concern in her tone. "I feel it too. Something is coming. Something dark." Kale opened his eyes, staring into the distance. The stars above, usually comforting and constant, seemed dimmer tonight. The world felt heavier. "It's as if the darkness has stirred once again," he murmured, standing up. "The balance is in jeopardy. But I can feel it, whatever this is, it is not natural. It's as if the shadow has a mind of its own." Lyra's hand found his, and together they stood, resolute. "We must seek the source of this darkness before it spreads any further. We cannot let it take root." And so, they set out, traveling far beyond the borders of their known lands. Their journey led them into the forgotten corners of the realm, where even the bravest warriors dared not tread. The further they ventured, the more the land seemed to shift, as if the very earth was rejecting them. The trees grew twisted, their branches clawing at the sky, and the air thickened with a malevolent energy. After many days of travel, they arrived at a place that felt untouched by time, an ancient citadel, long abandoned, hidden deep in the heart of a dark forest. The stone walls were covered in moss, and the air was thick with decay. It was here that Kale sensed the true source of the disturbance. "I feel it," Kale said quietly, his grip tightening around the hilt of the sacred sword. "The shadow is here. It is older than anything we've encountered before." Lyra, her eyes sharp and cautious, nodded. "We must be prepared. There's no telling what we'll find within." They entered the citadel cautiously, the air cold and oppressive. As they ventured deeper into its heart, the very walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. In the deepest chamber, they found what they had feared, the source of the darkness. A figure cloaked in black stood before an ancient altar, its back turned to them. Its presence was overwhelming, and its very being radiated power, dark, ancient power. The figure slowly turned, and Kale's heart froze. "You," Kale breathed, his voice faltering. The figure's face was hidden beneath a hood, but Kale could feel the malevolent presence emanating from it. The figure spoke, its voice a low, resonating whisper that seemed to echo through the very foundation of the citadel. "I have been waiting for you, Kale." "Lyra," the figure said, its voice cold as ice. The heart of the Isles has been calling to me. I have felt its power stir in the depths of the darkness, and now I claim it. Kale's grip tightened on his sword, his heart pounding. Who are you? What do you seek? The figure slowly lowered its hood, revealing a face that Kale knew all too well. It was the face of someone long thought dead, someone from Kale's past. A fallen knight, once his closest ally, now corrupted by the very darkness Kale had sworn to fight. Ah, Kale, the fallen knight whispered, a twisted smile curling on his lips. It's been a long time. I was once like you, a guardian of the realm, sworn to protect the balance. But I was betrayed by those I trusted, cast aside, left to rot in the shadows. And now, I have returned. I have embraced the darkness, and with it, I shall have the heart. Kale's blood ran cold. You cannot control the heart. It is not a weapon to be wielded by the likes of you. The fallen knight laughed, a dark, hollow sound that sent a shiver down Kale's spine. You are naive, Kale. The heart is not a tool of balance, it is a force of creation and destruction. It is the key to all power. And now, it is mine. In an instant, the dark energy surged around the fallen knight, warping the very fabric of the citadel. Shadows reached out like claws, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Lyra stepped forward, raising her hand in defiance. You will not take the heart, she declared, her voice strong. We will stop you, just as we have stopped the darkness before. The fallen knight's eyes glinted with malice. You think you can stop me? You have no idea what you're up against. The heart is mine by right, and when I wield its power, no force in this world will stand against me. Kale and Lyra exchanged a glance. They had faced many challenges together, but this was different. This was personal. We will not let you fall to the darkness, Kale said firmly, stepping forward, his sword glowing with the light of the heart within him. Together, we will stop you. The battle that ensued was unlike any Kale and Lyra had faced before. The fallen knight wielded the power of the darkness with terrifying mastery, summoning shadows to strike at them from all sides. Kale's sword clashed against the dark energy, its light flickering but never fading. Lyra fought beside him, her will unwavering as she summoned the sacred magic to counter the darkness. But as the battle raged on, Kale could feel the heart within him calling out, urging him to unleash its full power. He knew what he had to do, but the cost was great. The heart could save them, but it could also consume them. Lyra, stay back, Kale shouted, his voice strained. I have to do this. Kale, no, Lyra cried, her eyes wide with fear. If you use its full power, it will change you. You will be lost to the darkness. But Kale was resolute. With a cry, he summoned the heart's power, unleashing a blinding burst of light that tore through the darkness. The fallen knight screamed in agony as the light washed over him, but he did not relent. The shadows writhed, fighting against the light. Kale's body trembled with the strain, the heart's power overwhelming him, but he held firm. This is the light that will defeat you, he whispered, his voice resolute. This is the balance. With one final surge, Kale's light pierced through the shadows, and the fallen knight collapsed to the ground, the darkness receding. The citadel grew still once more, the oppressive weight lifting from the air. Kale fell to his knees, gasping for breath. Lyra rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she touched his shoulder. You did it, she whispered, her voice soft with relief. But at what cost, Kale? Kale looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and determination. The balance is maintained, but the darkness will always return. We must be ready. And so, with the fallen knight defeated, Kale and Lyra once again took up the mantle of guardians. The heart of the Isles remained hidden, its power a secret they would protect with their lives. The struggle between light and darkness would never truly end, but as long as they stood together, the realm would have its protectors. The citadel stood silent, its once oppressive darkness now gone. The very air felt lighter, but Kale could sense that the victory was not a true end. The balance had been restored for now, but the darkness had merely receded, not vanished. The world had a way of healing, but it also had a way of remembering. Kale rose shakily to his feet, feeling the weight of the heart's power within him. The burden of the light was both a blessing and a curse. He glanced at Lyra, her expression one of concern and relief. "You pushed yourself too far, Kale," she said gently, her hand resting on his arm. "You used the heart's power in a way that's dangerous. You could have lost yourself." Kale turned his gaze to the distant horizon, where the sun began to rise, casting a soft glow over the land. "I know," he whispered. "But the darkness had to be stopped. If I hadn't." "You didn't have to do it alone," Lyra interrupted, her voice firm. "We fight together, remember? You don't have to bear this burden by yourself." Kale's heart clenched at her words. She was right, of course. He had always fought alone in his heart, believing that he alone could save the realm. But Lyra had been with him every step of the way, and her strength was the anchor that kept him grounded. "I'm sorry," Kale said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I let the weight of this responsibility cloud my judgment." Lyra smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. "You are not alone, Kale. You never have been." They stood together in the ruins of the citadel, the sun rising higher in the sky, casting its golden light over the land. For a brief moment, the world seemed peaceful. But Kale could feel it the faintest ripple in the air, like a whisper that spoke of a future yet to unfold. "We've won this battle," Kale said quietly, "but the war is far from over." Lyra nodded solemnly. "The darkness is patient. It will wait, and when the time is right, it will strike again. We must be ready." And so, they set forth once more, their path uncertain but their resolve unwavering. As they traveled back toward the heart of the Isles, Kale and Lyra spoke little. The weight of the victory and the cost it exacted hung heavily in the air between them. Yet, despite the uncertainty that lay ahead, they knew they had each other. They reached the heart of the Isles once more, its glowing light a beacon in the distance. It pulsed with a steady rhythm, as if it were alive, its energy resonating with the balance of the world itself. They knew that as long as it remained hidden and protected, there would be hope. But Kale couldn't shake the feeling that something more was coming. Something far more dangerous than anything they had faced before. Weeks passed as Kale and Lyra resumed their guardianship of the heart. The land around them was healing, slowly but steadily, and the people of the realm began to rebuild. Yet, as the world seemed to grow calm, the whispers of darkness never fully faded from Kale's mind. There was a deeper threat, one tied to ancient powers that lay dormant beneath the earth, in the very heart of the abyss. One evening, as they sat beneath the stars, Kale felt the familiar pull again. This time, it was stronger. A deep, resonating voice echoed in his mind, an ancient call that he could not ignore. "Kale, Lyra, the time has come." Lyra looked up, her brow furrowed in concern. "Do you hear that?" Kale nodded, his gaze distant. "It's the abyss. It calls to me. Something stirs beneath the earth, something ancient. Something more powerful than we can imagine." Lyra stood, her hand reaching for her sword. "We can't let it awaken. Whatever this is, we must stop it before it destroys everything." Kale's heart raced. "I don't know if we're strong enough to face it, but we have no choice. The heart must be protected." They set out immediately, traveling toward the deepest part of the realm, where the land grew dark and cold. As they ventured further, the very ground beneath them seemed to tremble, as if something stirred in the depths. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and the once quiet winds now howled with a sinister force. After days of travel, they reached a vast, hollowed cavern, a place where the land seemed to collapse inward. The walls were etched with runes, ancient symbols of power that Kale did not fully understand. At the center of the cavern stood a massive stone door, sealed with dark magic. It was the source of the abyss, the heart of the forgotten realm. Kale could feel the overwhelming presence behind it, something ancient, something immense. "We need to break the seal," Kale said, his voice steady despite the terror he felt deep within. "We need to stop whatever is behind that door." Lyra nodded, her expression fierce. "I'll stand by you, Kale. Let's do this together." Together, they channeled the power of the heart, their combined energy illuminating the cavern with a brilliant light. The door trembled, its seal weakening, but as the magic flowed, a terrible roar echoed from within, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. The door shattered with a violent force, and a wave of dark energy surged forward, threatening to consume them both. Kale and Lyra braced themselves, standing firm as the darkness clawed at their bodies, seeking to drag them into the abyss. But then, something unexpected happened. From the darkness, a figure emerged, a figure cloaked in shadows, yet surrounded by a faint, radiant light. It was a woman, her eyes glowing with an ancient, ethereal power. Her presence was both terrifying and beautiful, as if she were both a part of the darkness and a protector of the light. "I am the guardian of the abyss," the woman spoke, her voice soft but powerful. "I have waited for you, Kale. I have waited for the one who would face the true darkness." Kale stepped forward, his sword at the ready. "What are you, and what is this place?" The woman smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "I am the keeper of the abyss. But my role is not to destroy. I was tasked with ensuring that the darkness does not consume the light, that it remains in balance. And you, Kale, are the key to that balance." "Balance?" Lyra echoed, stepping closer to Kale. "But if the darkness is allowed to return..." "It is not a matter of allowing the darkness to return," the woman interrupted gently. "The darkness is a part of the cycle. Without it, there can be no light. But it must be contained, controlled." Kale's grip on his sword tightened. "You speak of balance, but the darkness you speak of is not something we can simply accept. It's a force of destruction." The woman's eyes met his, filled with understanding. "That is why you must be the one to choose. The darkness must be sealed once more, but in doing so, it will always try to return. You must decide, will you continue to fight it, knowing it will never truly leave? Or will you seek to understand its true nature and find a way to live with it?" Kale stood in silence, the weight of her words pressing upon him. He had always fought the darkness, but now he was faced with the truth: there could be no simple victory, no final end. The battle for balance was eternal. Lyra stepped beside him, her voice soft but resolute. "Together, we will find a way. But we must decide what kind of world we want to protect." Kale nodded, the path ahead uncertain but clear. The balance must be maintained, whatever the cost. And so, they stood before the guardian of the abyss, ready to face the choice that would shape their future. Knowing that the true fight for the heart of the world had only just begun. The cavern was still, the air heavy with the weight of their conversation. Kale could feel the presence of the guardian of the abyss, her ancient power resonating like a deep echo within him. The woman's words lingered in the air, impossible to ignore. "I cannot keep fighting a battle that has no end," Kale whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Lyra stepped closer, her hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "You don't have to fight it alone anymore, Kale. We'll face this together, just like we always have." The guardian's ethereal voice broke the silence. You must understand, Kale. The darkness is not your enemy in the way you think. It is not a force to be defeated, but a force that must be respected. It is the counterpart to the light. Without the one, the other cannot exist. Kale shook his head, confusion clouding his thoughts. But how can we live with something that brings suffering? The darkness has taken so much from this world already. I cannot just accept it. The guardian's gaze softened, her voice becoming more like a whisper. That is the true test, Kale. The greatest power lies not in resisting the darkness, but in understanding it, in learning how to live with its presence. It is through balance that we find harmony, and it is that harmony that holds the world together. Lyra spoke then, her voice full of certainty. We protect the light by containing the darkness, but we do not destroy it. We do not allow it to consume us, nor do we let it dominate the world. Instead, we stand as its guardians, just as we have with the heart. Kale looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. Lyra had always been the anchor he needed, her wisdom and strength his guiding light. He turned his gaze back to the guardian. Tell me, he asked, his voice steady but tinged with doubt. How do we achieve this balance? How do we prevent the darkness from taking control once more? The guardian stepped forward, her hand raised as if to touch the air itself. The choice lies within you, Kale. You must choose how you will wield the heart's power. Will you continue to guard it, ensuring it is kept safe from those who would use it for their own gain? Or will you seek to unlock the true potential of the heart, embracing both the light and the darkness it holds? Kale's heart pounded in his chest. The power of the heart had already tested him once before, nearly consuming him with its might. He could not imagine wielding it again, knowing how fragile his own mind had become under its weight. I cannot do it alone, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I cannot control the heart without the risk of losing myself. Lyra placed both hands on his shoulders, her gaze unwavering. You are not alone, Kale. I will stand by you, always. Together, we will find a way to carry this burden. We will protect both the light and the darkness. The guardian's eyes softened, a knowing smile crossing her face. Then you have made your choice, Kale. You and Lyra will be the guardians of the balance. You will face both light and shadow with courage, wisdom, and compassion. But remember, balance is not something you can simply achieve once and forget. It is an eternal struggle, a dance between forces beyond your control. You must always remain vigilant. Kale nodded, a sense of resolve settling within him. He no longer felt the overwhelming weight of fear. There was still much to learn, but he had made his choice. With Lyra at his side, he could face whatever came next. We'll do it together, Kale said softly, a quiet strength in his voice. The guardian's smile deepened. You have chosen wisely. But remember, the abyss does not forget. It will always call to you, Kale. You must be prepared for the shadows that still linger. As the guardian faded into the ether, Kale and Lyra stood alone in the cavern, the door to the abyss now sealed once more. The air had changed, charged with a new energy, a new understanding. They were no longer merely warriors fighting for a cause. They were the guardians of the balance, tasked with maintaining the delicate equilibrium between light and dark. But even as they walked away from the cavern, Kale could not shake the feeling that the abyss was not done with them. The darkness had been sealed for now, but the echoes of its power remained, and Kale could not help but wonder if, in time, they would be forced to face it once again. That's the end of today's story. See you.